Self-Awareness, Step 1 to Owning Your Impact. It's presented by Wendy Ryan. My name is Brandy Hudson. I'm a co-chair on the board for HR.com's San Francisco chapter, and I'll be moderating today's session. I do want to mention, I noticed for some reason a lot of people's names are coming in as mine. So if you do know how to change your name, if you could please change it over to your name, that'll help us be able to record a little bit better who was logging in and who was here, so we can be in touch with you. And also, before we begin, I'd like to just share a little bit about HR.com, the go-to resource for all things that you do to simplify your work and to keep you compliant and help you stay up to date. With HR.com Prime or HR Prime, you can take your HR.com membership a step further. So you'll receive exclusive access to HR forms and policies, trainings, updates on federal and state laws, and tools to build an employee handbook, deliver performance reviews, and write job descriptions in seconds. So for more information, please visit hr.com/prime. And to all of you NCHRA members out there, we just wanted to remind you that you are now also a part of the HR.com Prime Members Network. So our webcast today has been pre-approved for HRCI and SHRM credits. Please be sure to attend the complete webcast in order to receive these credits. You'll then receive an email within 2 business days with your certification credit information. It will also be automatically added to your HR.com profile, and you can view it under My Credits. If you're joining from the Eventbrite link, we will also have your credits emailed to you within 2 business days. As a reminder, all attendees are in listen-only mode. If you have any questions during the webcast, click the Q&A feature in your webinar controls and type them there. You may also use the chat function to engage with the panelists. So be sure to stick around after. We are also going to have about 30 minutes of open networking as soon as Wendy is done. And now on to our speaker, Wendy Ryan. Wendy is a strategic advisor to HR leaders, board members, and CEOs, an expert on leadership and gender issues in the workplace, and is a sought-after mentor for rising talent. With over 25 years of combined experience in human resources, organizational development, nonprofit leadership, and executive coaching, Wendy has worked with hundreds of individuals and organizations. Her ability to assess and engage individuals and groups from, quote, where they are, facilitates breakthroughs in business results. Wendy holds a master's degree in human resources and organizational development from the University of San Francisco, in addition to a postgraduate certificate in management and innovation from Bentley College, and dual bachelor degrees in psychology and Spanish from the University of California at Davis. Wendy is a powerhouse, so it is now my pleasure to turn it over to her and learn something from the master. Wendy?
Thank you, Brandy, and good morning. I'm Wendy Ryan, CEO of Cadabra. And just a quick mention about my team. We are an interdisciplinary team of leadership coaches and consultants on a mission to grow exceptional leaders and teams. Our aim is to facilitate an unprecedented surge of positive change in and around every organization that we serve. To begin, I would like to acknowledge that I and most of my team members live and work on the ancestral homelands of the Ramaytush and Tamien peoples of the San Francisco Bay Area. Self-awareness collectively inspires and requires us to offer that acknowledgement as part of owning our own impact at Cadabra. So, question here is, how self-aware are you? And Brandy, if we can go to the next slide. Perfect. According to research, I'm sorry to say that the odds are not in your favor. In her book, Insight, Dr. Tasha Eurich reports that while about 95% of us believe we're self-aware, only about 10 to 15% actually are. When I first read that, it kind of blew my mind. Let's think for a moment, though, and just let that sink in. And if you think about the least self-aware person that you know, for many of us, it's someone like our mother-in-law. For others, it's our boss or it's a colleague. And just imagine asking that person if they think they're self-aware. Do you think any of them would actually say no? When we think about it that way, the 95%, the 10 and 15% start to really make more sense. And there are two different kinds of self-awareness. So when we talk about this, we need to think about it in two dimensions, not just a single dimension. Internal self-awareness is, how well do I know myself? How well do I understand my own emotions, my own thinking, my own behavior? External self-awareness is knowing how other people perceive me. And I used to assume, and I'm sure many of you as well could still assume, that these are pretty correlated. If I know myself well, it kind of follows intuitively that I would be more likely to know how I show up to others, right? Wrong. Urich's research tells us that one type of self-awareness actually has very little to do with the other type of self-awareness. So we have to be really tricky, not tricky, we don't have to be tricky, but we have to be really careful when we assume, oh, I know myself really well, therefore I am so tuned in to how other people see me. Let's do a quick poll now and see what you think about this. Which one do you think is stronger for you? Internal or external self-awareness? So there's a yes, an internal, an external, or about the same. So the poll's up now. If you can see that and enter your response, that would be great. And are we getting some responses in on the poll, or?
We are. I should say we're at 76% voted right now. So far, the majority is internal. So I will close it in just 4 seconds and we'll see where we're at.
Awesome.
Okay. All right. So the results are 56% internal, 11% external, and then 33% about the same.
Wow. Interesting. So, okay, so I like this group. You are confident. You're saying, I think I'm in that 10 to 15% that are self-aware in both dimensions. Love it. Interesting that most of us thought, yeah, we're probably, if we have to choose, we're a little more internally self-aware than externally. I appreciate that. So thank you. One explanation for the research findings on self-awareness points to mindset. And one of my favorite researchers on mindset and a colleague of mine is Dr. Ryan Gottfredson at Cal State Fullerton. And his model visualizes mindsets as the first filters or the lenses through which we perceive everything. In other words, mindsets color our perception of things before the personality filter does. So if you've heard the expression, looking at things through rose-colored glasses, that's a really good analogy. We actually get so used to the lenses that we're looking through that we don't even recognize they're there. I don't know if this has happened to any of you, but I forget that my reading glasses are on my face all the time. And then I go walk around the house and it's like, wow, why is everything so big? It's like that with mindsets. We don't even recognize that they're there, but they're operating very powerfully and moderating our self-awareness all the time. Let's walk through a really quick example of how this works. So let's say I have a relatively closed mindset compared to yours, which means that I've sort of decided what I think and feel and believe, and I'm not particularly open to evidence to the contrary. So I'm pretty prone to confirmation bias overall. Let's say your mindset happens to be more open. Now, both of us get feedback from our direct reports that we tend to cut them off when they're talking. I don't know if that's ever happened to any of you, but I think that's something I've worked on in the past. Because I have a closed mindset, I'm a lot more likely to ignore that feedback. And that feedback doesn't, as a result, help me become more self-aware. You, on the other hand, if you have a more open mindset, you are able to take in that feedback in such a way that you actually can use it to become more self-aware. And your behavior is more likely to change as a result. So there's a really bright, clear, strong through line that runs between mindsets, our degree of self-awareness, and the resulting impact that we have on others. So if we go to the next slide.
Okay.
Thank you. In leadership development, we talk a lot about owning your impact on others. It's kind of a popular, buzz phrase that we like to use. And that concept, to me, has taken on even greater relevance and renewed urgency for HR practitioners and leaders as a result of COVID-19 and the Black Lives Matter movement. So this is a really big deal now, and it means more than it ever has in many different ways, beyond what I think it ever has for us. When it comes to your self-awareness and owning your personal impact, however, how many of you are using some personal discomfort as a shield and limiting yourself, your team, your organization in the process? This is a tough question to ask yourself, but it's something I want you to reflect on this morning. You can think about our goal today as helping you learn how to lower your shield, how to deal with some of that discomfort so that everybody can grow. Because none of us can be more self-aware than the most self-aware leader that we're in contact with. So if you don't think your self-awareness matters, it really, really does. As HR experts, you already know that the foundation for emotional intelligence and effective leadership in any context is self-awareness. You probably also know that people have when they have low external awareness, self-awareness, and they don't understand how they show up to others, those are the people that derail, aren't they? We used to call it career derailment. When people, wow, great potential, super smart, very innovative, but just has a few things that rub people the wrong way, and that's really going to limit where they can go in the future unless they can develop past that. So one of the most powerful and important steps you can take to own your impact is to clarify your why. And your why is actually made up of two whats. Number one is, what impact do you want to have? And this answer for you is going to change, right? Throughout your life, throughout your career. So the kind of impact I wanted to have when I was 10 years old versus the kind of impact I wanted to have at 25 versus 50 is a lot different. And that's as it should be. Life changes, we change. But what do we want to have as our impact right now? That's an important question for you to answer. Number two, what will having greater self-awareness contribute to that? So it's not enough to just say, this is the impact I want to have as a CHRO, as a manager in learning and development, as a CEO. But how do I think self-awareness is going to really contribute to that? How do those two fit together for me specifically? So I'd like to invite you now to take a moment. Hopefully you have a pen and paper nearby. You can talk into your phone, but record your answers. I want you to think about those two questions and write down or record your answers. The final version is hopefully going to be SMART: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Why don't we go ahead and advance the slide? I know the one I'm looking at's gotten a little bit blurry. So I don't know, Brandy, if that's your
Yeah,
your camera getting tired.
Maybe. I'm on the yellow slide right now. Let me see if maybe I need to quit and reshare. Just give me one moment.
Yeah, so there's a question coming up in the chat about what exactly are the two questions. So let me go ahead and repeat that. Question number one is, what impact do you want to have now? It could be, you could think of it more in the personal domain or the professional domain, or both. Number two, what is having greater self-awareness going to contribute to that? So if I know the impact I want to have, you know, what is it about self-awareness that's going to give me some leverage to that impact? And some of the panelists are saying it looks clear here on the slides, and so that's good. It could just be on my end.
Wendy, am I on the right page for you, right in the slide for you right now, the yellow slide?
You
or?
are.
Okay.
You are. So we've got a fun graphic. We've got complex carbohydrates on the right. One of my favorite cartoonists is Gemma Carroll. And then an example of a smartly worded part of your why on the left. So a good example is, by December 31st, 2020, I want to reduce the number and frequency of conflicts with my colleague by 80%. You don't necessarily have to get to that right now, but you want to get to that soon, because having that clarity and writing it down increases the odds that you'll actually execute on that very significantly. Okay, so let's put a pin in that, and we'll advance to the next slide, please. And visiting a museum is a great analogy for working on self-awareness, and it's a fun analogy. So I want to invite you to kind of take a journey with me and imagine for a moment that you are the museum. I'm going to share 4 ways that you can maximize your internal and your external self-awareness, and we're going to use the museum as our analogy for doing that. The steps are: get a guidebook and read the signage, tour with a docent, buy a souvenir, and become a member. So let's go ahead on to the next slide. So when we think about self-awareness, one of the best guidebooks we have, or maps to our own personal museum, come in the form of assessments. And I'm curious, before we talk about this, how many assessments have you all taken in the past? Some people have said, I've never taken an assessment. Some people have taken a couple. Some have taken almost every assessment we've ever heard of. So the question coming up now on the poll, and I'd invite you to contribute, is how many assessments have you taken before? 0, 1 to 2, 3 to 4, or 5+?
Right, so far about 60% voted. Give it a few more seconds.
Terrific. And if you have a favorite assessment and you'd like to type that in the chat for us, I think that would also be great for us to see.
Yes, that would be wonderful. So we're at 70% voted right now. We'll just give it another 5 to 8 seconds and see what else rolls in.
Great, I'm seeing MBTI, People Map, Everything Disc, EQI, True Colors, familiar with all of those. Yes.
All right, so our results. We have 0 6% people said 0, 37% said 1 to 2, 34% said 3 to 4, and 24% 5 plus.
Okay, yeah, so those results are fairly typical, although I would say a little bit on the high side. I'm not surprised given that this is, we have a lot of HR practitioners here in the audience. So I think it's important to say up front that in my view, there's no such thing as one single best assessment. Cadabra is an authorized partner with Wiley for Everything DISC, 5 Behaviors of a Cohesive Team, and I'll talk just a little bit about DISC and why we tend to use that a lot. But I would never say that it's the best and only assessment ever. There's a few important criteria to keep in mind when you're trying to choose an assessment. So a good assessment, unfortunately, is probably not the fun one that you found in your favorite magazine or blog. Effective assessments for building self-awareness are really based on having a clear model that is well validated by the research. The sample size is large, you know, in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, sometimes even millions of participants who have taken it before. So they have a huge database of comparative results that they can use to keep improving that assessment over time. So most assessments that meet that criteria so far have been around for a while. Some of them have been around for decades, but I would say if it's been around for 15, 20 years, that's a good kind of threshold to start with. And so important is the report that you receive from the assessment. It should explain your results in a way that it's really easy for you to take action as a result of that. If the language is beautiful, but it's really abstract and you're not quite sure what the key takeaways are or how to apply them, it just isn't going to have as much value in terms of your own self-awareness and quickly meeting your impact goal. Beyond these criteria, the best assessment, it really comes back to that. It depends on your why. Does your why involve building self-awareness to impact your personal relationships? So in that case, I would say consider taking a psychological or personality-based assessment, because if you think about our personal relationships with family members, with friends, romantic partners, they tend to be relatively long-term and more stable, just like our personality tends to be relatively long-term and more stable as a construct than some other types of dimensions of us. So good examples and popular ones here are Myers-Briggs, which I know a few people in chat have talked about, Hogan, and 16PF. And all three of those are based on the Big Five model of personality, which again is a very well validated model and really useful, especially when you're trying to understand yourself for relationships in the long haul. Now, when your why is more about building self-awareness to advance professional or career-related goals, then we might start to look at things a little bit differently. In that context, you really want to think about, would a talent-based, a behavioral-based, or a thinking style assessment potentially be a little bit more useful? How you show up to others at work tends to be more situational. It tends to be more context specific than in our personal lives. So at Cadabra, we like to use Everything DISC, and we also like to use Clifton Strengths, both of which are pretty widely known for this purpose. I mentioned before Everything DISC, to us it's kind of the Swiss Army knife. It's accurate, it's easy for people to understand, and it's highly, highly actionable. Clifton Strengths is great for discerning things like, do I really want to manage people? Or would I rather pursue a career as an amazing individual contributor? What kind of role would really channel my interests and my strengths best? I think it's fantastic for that. Another type of assessment that's really important to mention is 360 feedback. And that can be collected through verbal interviews or an online survey. Sometimes we do a little bit of both, but usually it's one or the other. And if you ever have the opportunity to receive 360 feedback, or if you're in a position to sponsor that in your organization, even if it's just for a certain leadership level or a particular functional groups, I highly recommend it. And here's why. It's having the opportunity to really quickly connect with external self-awareness and build that muscle. Some people talk about, it's really hard to read the tag on the inside of your shirt when you're wearing the shirt. And it's a lot like that. If we don't ever get 360 feedback, we're always going to be like, well, I think my tag says this is a size 12, but I'm not sure. It could be a 14. So 360 feedback is analogous to taking that shirt off, actually looking at the tag and going, oh, okay, this is how I'm showing up to others, whether I'm aware of it or not. So before we dive into our second approach for building self-awareness, let's go ahead and take another quick poll. And we can go ahead and advance the slide as well. So this time we're going to look at who has helped you become more self-aware. So a coach, a therapist, a spiritual advisor, a mentor, a peer, a friend, a family member, and you can check more than one. So for some of it's, hey, I've relied on all 7 of those choices. Others of us have gone it alone. So I'm curious to hear.
Okay. We are just about at 50% voted, so I'll give it a few more seconds. Okay. And I'm going to stop the poll now. Let's see, it looks like for coach we had 18%, therapist,
Great.
Yeah, therapist 27%, spiritual advisor 16%, mentor 45%, which is great. Peer is also high at 47%. Friend comes in at the top for 64%, and family members are 55%.
I love that. I love that there's a range. I don't know how many of you selected more than one, but I think this just goes to show that help comes in a lot of different forms. That the common denominator here is working with another person. It might sound counterintuitive, say, well, isn't self-awareness about getting in touch with myself? Yes, but again, it's not just about understanding ourselves, it's also about understanding how we show up to others. And beyond that, beyond kind of the 360 lens that another person can give us, there's a little more to it than that. So if you can afford to pay someone like a coach or a therapist, or if your organization does sponsor 360 feedback or other assessments for your employees, I really want you to consider providing access for people to a professional, if just to help them create a development plan and a follow-up action plan based on those assessment results. When we don't do that, it's kind of like giving people a map or a guidebook to their own museum, but it's in a language that they don't necessarily understand. So it would be like if I went to Exploratorium and picked up a map, but it was in Japanese. I don't read Japanese and I don't speak the language. So I'm doing a lot of guessing. So even if there isn't a lot of robust follow-on coaching that you can support, it's so helpful to have someone with you in that initial interpretation and action planning. There are some downsides that can happen. One thing about human nature is we tend to fixate on one or two things. So I can't tell you how many hundreds of people that I've sat with to debrief an assessment. And we can talk about, 25 great strengths that emerged. We can talk about a couple of areas of opportunity, and 95% of the time, no matter who they are or the personality, the focus is largely on what are the things I need to work on to get better at. And usually it's one or two things that sort of hook them emotionally. So they're not even necessarily the areas of opportunity that would align to the impact they want to have, that would actually help them meet that goal. So to me, that's one of the best things about engaging another person, even if it's a friend or a mentor, and you're just saying, hey, can you look at these results with me and kind of validate what I'm thinking in terms of what are the things I should pull out of here to really focus on first. And you can only focus on a limited number of things at a time. You have to be choosy and you have to go slow. So if you have a friend, if you have a coach, if you have a mentor, they can really help you stay focused and on track with that plan as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and advance to the next slide. Okay, so question here, how many of you remember or still have something from a company called Successories? And no, I don't receive any commission from them. If this doesn't sound familiar to you, that's the company that makes those inspirational posters that people would hang in their offices. And they usually say something like challenge or opportunity or courage. And along with the word is this gorgeous photo of someone pole vaulting or rock climbing, you know, doing something that we sort of see as hard and difficult, and wow, we wish we could be that person. So they're meant to be inspirational. And I realize that some of you are saying, oh yeah, that's a poster that used to hang in my dad's office. And others of us are saying, oh, wait a minute, I still have 3 of those in my office, right? So depending on where you are in your own life journey, you might have a different response to that question. So if you have one of those in your office or have had, I would love for you to share with us in the chat, what are some of those inspirational poster words, sayings that you had in your environment?
Never, never quit came from Kevin. Taft, I know you said you had one. If you could put in the notes which one that is, that would be great.
Yeah, and I love that Rebecca says, I actually used to represent them. So
Believe and succeed. I have
great.
a Boyd's Bear from up here that says regional advisor. Here's a Disney quote. It's not hard to make decisions once you know what your values are.
Terrific.
Wendy, does the hang in there kittens poster, does that one apply?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what Successories is onto, and what a lot of you are intuitively onto, whether you have an official Successories branded sign in your office, is that owning your impact and working on your self-awareness benefit when you set up your environment to support your success. Another way to think about this is how many of us over the years tried to lose weight? Certainly that has been me a number of times. And the advice that I came across years ago was, you know, go to a magazine, find a picture of the body that you wish you had, and hang that on the refrigerator. So every time you go to the refrigerator to get a snack, you see that, and it's sort of like a stop sign that says, wait a minute, are you on track with your goals here or not? So this is the same idea here. What can we do in our environment to really support our success in working on our goals? And so we have lots of options today, thanks to Amazon, thanks to Etsy, thanks to all the wonderful vendors out there who we can, you know, explore the world now. And So for you, it might look like just picking up an inexpensive sign. It doesn't have to be a huge investment. It could be an object, it could be a special polished rock, it could be a book that you really like that you just place on your desk or you keep it on your nightstand. Whatever gets your attention and functions as a cue to remind you what you want to pay attention to is really helpful. So I have two signs in my office. One says, enjoy the moment. The other says, all great changes are preceded by chaos. And both are meaningful to me, and they really function as reminders about how I want to impact others, what I want to pay attention to in myself, and how I want to impact others. So let's go ahead and launch our next poll, and let's just take a quick inventory of how many reminders do you think you have right now in your environment? And I realize, you know, almost all of us are home instead of in the office now. So I wonder if you've replicated anything that used to be serving that function in your office at home. So how many visual reminders do you use to help you right now be self-aware? 0, 1 to 2, 3 to 4, or 5+?
Watching those numbers roll in right now, we're just at 50%. So give it a couple more seconds.
Fantastic.
Yeah, looks like we are at about 62% of the vote. So I'm going to close it in just 5 more seconds. So get your answer in.
All right.
Okay. All right. So we have 35% said 0, 45% said 1 to 2, 14% said 3 to 4, and then 6% said 5+.
Okay, so not too many of us are really working that environment to help set us up for success. So this might be something that, as a takeaway from today, you want to consider. The rest of you that maybe don't have anything right now that you really intentionally use as a cue, or maybe you just have 1 or 2 things. Think about what else you could introduce into the environment. Maybe it's a picture that your child drew for you that reminds you to pause and build playtime into your day. Whatever it is for you that connects to your why, to your impact, and why self-awareness matters, that's what can help you be successful here. So last thing I want to talk about, if we go ahead and advance the slide, is what works and doesn't work to increase your self-awareness. And going back to our museum analogy, have any of you ever tried to see everything in a huge museum all in one day? You go to the Smithsonian in DC and you're like, okay, we're going to approach this boot camp style. You know, we're going to see the whole thing, the whole Air and Space Museum in 1 hour. I certainly am guilty of that. And guess what? It was overwhelming. It was like sensory overload, and I was exhausted. After that, I had to go back to the hotel and take a nap. I couldn't do anything else. So what's interesting to me is a lot of times we think self-awareness is like that. You know, we think that we can have an offsite, and in a day we're going to do a deep dive and get self-aware, and then we're done. And I get why that happens, but we really do ourselves a disservice through that, because we just are not built to do something like become more self-aware in a really concentrated period of time and to try to do so much of it at once. So it's a lot more effective when we do it in smaller time chunks. In other words, having structure is really helpful. And things like taking a class online or just scheduling a 15-minute mindfulness time in your calendar is the way to do that. You want to have nothing more than like an hour or 2, and you want to space that out over time if you're doing the class approach. And during the times when you're sort of actively reflecting, so let's say you're taking a mindfulness moment, or you've set aside time to journal in the morning and focus on self-awareness. What I want to encourage you to do is ask what questions instead of why questions. So, for example, if you're journaling about the fact that you got really upset when your son forgot to turn on the dishwasher before he left the house, which happens in my world sometimes, it's a lot more effective to ask, instead of just saying, okay, I'm really upset. Why am I upset? Better for me to ask, what emotions am I experiencing here? So upset is a little general. First of all, how do I get more specific? Is it that I'm angry? Is it that I'm frustrated, or that I'm sad? How do I get more specific? And then, what was different last week when I noticed he did remember to run the dishwasher? What did we talk about before he left the house? What state of mind was I in? So, what questions propel us forward into action instead of us keeping us stuck and feeling self-pity? So that's a very small shift you can make that's going to make your introspection and your self-reflection so much more productive. So I'm curious to know, how many of you have a regular mindfulness practice that you do follow? Or if you use mindfulness in your work day to day. So we're going to take our last poll is going to be about this, and it's just yes or no. Do you regularly use any mindfulness techniques?
And Wendy, while the poll results are coming through, Amy Danner had a great question. She asked, how do you prevent yourself from, quote, overlooking the signs after having them up for a while?
I love that question. Certainly, you know, my sister's an interior designer, and I'm sure what she would say is make sure you're rotating. From time to time, you've got to refresh that environment, because you're right, we
Yeah.
start to sort of tune it out after a while. And just being aware that if we're really doing the work, what we need is going to change, right? So the things I'm working on right now is going to be different than what I'm working on in January.
Great. And it looks like the results are in. We have 43% saying that yes, they do regularly use any mindfulness techniques, and then 57% saying no.
Great. That's awesome. Well, I'm so glad we're gonna share a technique with you this morning, so you can try that on. And those of you who do, again, I invite you just to share in the chat so we can all learn together about what are some examples that you're using. So if we go ahead and advance to the next slide, please. So when we think about mindfulness practice, you know, that can mean different things to different people. What I like to start with, and for people that don't necessarily have something that they're integrated with, or for whom this maybe seems a little touchy-feely, a little uncomfortable, is say, you know, the essence of mindfulness is just getting in touch with our five senses and slowing ourselves down a little bit, getting quiet and still enough that our brain can start to notice different things that we normally just tune out. So if you do this exercise on a regular basis, it only takes 5 minutes. It's great to do this every day, but again, if it's more realistic to just do it a couple times a week, you will notice very quickly a change in your ability to notice and tune into what's happening for you in every context. It's the great thing about our brains is that they're really, really flexible when it comes to this stuff. So we can very quickly get leverage out of this. So let's go ahead and start, and thank you for all the contributions in the chat about what you're doing. I see meditation, journaling, walks. I love that. I love the walking meditation. I'm a big fan. And cooking. Cooking's good. It takes all my concentration to cook. Awesome. Thank you for that. So to do this exercise, it's really simple. You don't need any props. You just need to be sitting in your chair, and I invite you now to, you can sit on the floor if that's more comfortable for you. But ideally, if you're in a chair like me, you want to have your feet flat on the floor, and you want to just let your hands rest in your lap. If you're clenching your fingers together or your arms are crossed like this, I want to just invite you to let those hands rest on your lap in a comfortable, relaxed position. And starting with that, then you're going to close your eyes and take 3 deep breaths. Ready? Go. So as you breathe in, you want to make sure that you're filling your belly with air, not just your chest. And then keeping your eyes closed, I want you to tune into what sounds you're hearing. So in addition to my voice, do you hear a fan in the background? Do you hear a lawnmower? Do you hear your kids talking? Do you hear birds chirping or dogs barking? And just notice what you're hearing that you weren't listening to a moment ago. Next, I want you to focus on what sensation you're picking up on in the soles of your feet, in the palm of your hands, in your shoulders, in your hips. Feel the weight of your body. Do you feel a tingling in the soles of your feet? Are your feet cold? Do your shoulders feel tight? And you're just noticing. You're not worrying right now about why or what's happening. We're just practicing our noticing. Now I want you to take a deep breath in and through your nose and see, what do you smell? Do you smell anything? Do you smell flowers? Do you smell the dirty laundry in the corner? Do you smell last night's dinner? Do you smell the dog? Just notice. There's no judgment. It's just noticing. Then I want you to turn your attention to your mouth. Um, is there any taste in there that you haven't been noticing? Do you still taste your coffee? Now you can slowly open your eyes, and just as you open your eyes, very slowly just turn your head from side to side and let your eyes just rest on what you see. Notice the colors, the textures, the patterns. So instead of looking at an object and saying that's a book, what are you noticing about the book? What color is the book? How bright of a color is that? What do your eyes tell you, separate from what your brain wants to tell you? Great. And now I would invite you to either write down and record, or you can share in the chat if you'd like. What were some of the things that you noticed when we did that exercise? Did you hear some sounds that you had been tuning out? Did you notice that your shoulders were tight? What is it that you were able to tune into?
So, uh, Chris Ann said her heartbeat. Dee Wilson says just refreshed. Liz
Good.
Lawrence heard some seagulls. Karen noticed that her shoulders were tight, and Lisa says bug sounds outside and a lawnmower and traffic.
Good. Yeah.
Never realized how loud my clock was. That one always gets me.
Me too.
Yes.
The fridge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A couple people noticing shoulder and neck are tight. I think that's where all of us must really
A lot of
connect
us hold
there.
tension there. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Good. Um, One of the reasons this is so powerful is because we're actually getting about 11 million points of data every second is hitting our senses. But our brains can't handle that. So we can only tune into, and again, back to mindsets, really are the filters that help us draw our attention to the much smaller subset of inputs that we're actually able to process. So one of the powerful things about this exercise is that it just slows that system down, and it allows us to notice some other things, but more importantly, when you close your eyes and you're focusing in on one sense at a time, you're sort of practicing deliberately filtering as opposed to letting your mindsets just kind of filter and do the work for you. So I want to thank you before we get to the Q&A in making the investment in yourself this morning to attend, because I know that you have other places to be and lots of other things to do. I hope you're walking away with some tools and some different ways of thinking that you can use immediately. And what's going to happen from here, in addition to the things that Brandy talked about, you'll be receiving a follow-up email from my colleague Monica within the next business day. And that's just for two reasons. One is that we do have a handout that accompanies this talk that we'd like to give to you. Secondly, we do have an upcoming EI webinar that we're going to be making available to you at a reduced rate. If you like what you experienced this morning and you want to build on that, emotional intelligence and the work we do around that is kind of a nice follow-on and support to self-awareness. And I also want to make sure that you have some links and other resources that I mentioned. So a number of people in the chat said things like, can we get a list of assessments that you mentioned or some of the books that you talked about? So we'll kind of tidy that up, put it all in one place for you. And you can think of that as, if any of you are podcast fans as I am, they're kind of like our show notes. So those will be going out to you. And if you were one of the first 100 people to register for this webinar, we are able to also send you an access code to take the Everything DISC assessment free of charge. If you were not one of the first 100, I'm sorry, but we can also give you some information about how you can still access the DISC. We'd really like to support you in that and make that accessible for you. So beyond that, be well. And I really look forward to your questions and hopefully some networking time as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Wendy. So looks like we have one question in the Q&A and then 4 people with their hands raised. So I'm going to start with Anne, who had her hand raised. Anne, I'm allowing you to be able to talk to Wendy.
Hi, Anne.
Oh, let's see. Looks like she's muted. Anne, can you unmute yourself? I'm not able to unmute you from here.
Oh, I apologize. I did not mean to raise my hand. Sorry about that.
No worries.
That's okay. It's great to hear your voice anyway. Thank you.
All right, so let's see. So we'll move to Elizabeth. Elizabeth, did you?
Good morning, Elizabeth.
Okay. While we figure that part out, Faith asked in the Q&A, do you have any recommended reading materials?
Definitely. The two researchers that I mentioned both have great books that have really informed my thinking around self-awareness and how we work with it as a team. The first one is by Tasha Eurich. It's a book called Insight. She is an expert on self-awareness. She also does a lot of coaching and leadership development. So she really looks at it in that context. The other is Dr. Ryan Gottfredson. His book is Success Mindsets. And if you work on one thing in leadership development this year, in addition to self-awareness, I would say mindsets is the place to go. And it's really where we need to go going forward as a community in terms of how do we cultivate leaders who are future fit and future ready. So both of those books are excellent, and we'll see if we can put a few more into the email notes as well.
Let's see. Tammy, I'm going to allow you to talk. And let's see. Okay, and while maybe Tammy's getting set up, Dwinda was asking, can we use the mindfulness exercise with our team, like your slide? Do they need special permission to use this mindfulness exercise slide?
Oh, thanks for asking. No, not at all. That's for you to use wherever you feel like it would be helpful and productive.
Okay. And Meg is asking, what's Ryan's last name again?
Oh, Ryan Gottfredson.
Okay. All right. Next, Deidre is asking, what's the duration of the coming EI webinar?
90 minutes.
Okay. And let's see, Stephanie wants to know, how do you influence another person to have a more open mindset?
Oh, this is a big, juicy question. And it helps if the person knows a little bit about mindsets to begin with. If you can start with what's our mental model for talking about that. Some people have heard of mindsets, some people really haven't. And so I think it helps to have a starting point for why does this matter? So getting educated about that is a good way to go. People have the mindsets they have for lots of good reasons. A lot of it has to do with how we're naturally wired. It does relate a little bit to personality, but it also has to do with our lived experience. And so we have to always be careful when we are trying to support someone in shifting their mindset that we're not imposing our experience onto theirs, right? So sometimes we can think someone doesn't have an open mindset, but it's that the words we're hearing don't fit our narrative for what an open mindset looks like. So there's lots of things to be thoughtful about there, but I would say it comes up, it's the starting point is, do we have a mental model that we can both work with to talk about this?
Great. Liliana asked, do you have any free assessments you can recommend?
Yeah, I love that question. It's usually free assessments are there's a little bit of a red flag in that, because most of the assessments that I would recommend, that my team would recommend, part of why they're very useful and they're very valid is because there's been a lot of investment behind doing the research, behind keeping them current, that needs to happen. So I would be wary of a free assessment unless it was something that's like included as part of another program that you're offering or sponsoring. If it's part of an offsite or if it's part of a leadership development program, sometimes assessments will be embedded in that, and that's kind of a different thing. But free standalone, I would be a little bit wary.
Okay. And I'm just going to go ahead and launch the poll that we have, which is some follow-up questions about the event while we finish going through the final questions here. Let's see. How Andrea asked, how do you promote self-awareness and people that could talk openly about development.
So how do you promote self-awareness and people who talk openly about, can you repeat that?
Yes, it is. How do you promote self-awareness and people could talk openly about their development? So Andrea asked that question.
Yeah. It's important to set up safe containers for that. And by that, I mean that we want to be really thoughtful about creating spaces for people to be able to talk about what's going on with them, what they're noticing, and not worry about where that information's going or where that's being used. So I would say that one thing to be thoughtful about is how do we achieve that? How do we create small groups? How do we have boundaries around what happens in those groups and those discussions and how that information gets used? So I think it's being really thoughtful about that is super important. It is helpful if talking about things like emotions, talking about our experiences, sharing our personal lives with each other is already a norm in your organization. In some organizations and in their cultures, there's a lot more of that sharing. Other organizations and cultures are still a bit more formal. And so there has to be oftentimes a shift in the culture where that feels safe and okay and becomes normalized, that we have these kind of discussions. So I think as HR professionals, we want to really take that context into account and see sort of what's the order of operations here. Do we need to do some work on the culture and the organization, or do we feel like this is fertile ground already for having some of that deeper work? And then how do we structure that deeper work in a way intentionally to make it feel really safe for people? So I hope that answered your question.
Great. And while we wait to see if any other questions come in, I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping real quick since it is actually 9:03. Wow. Stick around, please, if you would like. We have the Zoom open for as long as the networking would like to go on. I really want to thank Wendy for such a great presentation, and thank you all for joining us today. As Wendy said, we know you have a lot of Zoom places to be, so we really do appreciate that you chose to spend this last hour with us. If you'd like to view the webcast again, the archived recording and the presentation slides will be available within 24 hours, roughly, on the HR.com website under the archived virtual events. As an HR.com member, you can register and attend as many webcast virtual events as you like, while earning up to 5 HRC1 and SHRM credits each month. If you want to earn even more credits, then upgrade to our Prime Plus or our recertification program to unlimited credits. And we just have this short poll here that we have been asking a few questions on. So if you could just finish this last question for us, the feedback is really helpful for us to know what type of content to bring you next. And so this concludes the presentation part. Like I said, please remain online if you want to do some networking, and to everybody else, have a great rest of your day. Okay, great. And oh, great. We're getting a lot of thank you, Wendy's. Looking forward to the follow-up. Make it a great day. Thank you for a great session. A couple people, I'm going to call out Krista's specifically. This was one of the best webinars I've been through on the HR.com website. So thank you.
Thank you.
Lots of gratitude and thank yous, Wendy.
Terrific, and right back at you guys.
Great. And yeah,
so I can hang on for networking, or I can hop off. Whatever, Brandy, you think is.
Let's see. I think why doesn't everybody, if you want to unmute yourself, you're welcome to talk. And I guess if there's no kind of movement with that in the next minute and a half, 2 minutes, then we'll just end the session.
Sounds good.